Since taking office, Donald Trump has effectively turned the world order on its head, scrapping multilateral agreements like the Paris Climate Accord and slapping our closest allies with trade tariffs. But it was last week that Trump announced what may amount to his most monumental decision on the world stage to date: the withdrawal of the United States from the historic 2015 Iran nuclear deal. While the move was widely anticipated, both by the countries that signed the agreement under Barack Obama, France, Germany, Britain, Russia, and China, among others, and by lawmakers on Capitol Hill, the path forward remains murky, and risks turning the Middle East into a tinderbox. As tensions mount, The Hive spoke with Democratic Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, who sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, about the fallout from Trump's decision to withdraw from the Iran deal, the White House's ongoing negotiations with North Korea, and the future of the Democratic Party in a post-Trump era. Hive: You voted against the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, but have argued that a U.S. withdrawal from the agreement was the wrong way to go. What is your response to Donald Trump's decision to pull out of the J.C.P.O.A.? Ben Cardin: President Trump's decision to withdraw the United States from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is bad policy and calls into question America's international credibility. Mr. Trump has now set the international community on a slippery slope, imperiling the national security interests of the United States and our allies. Iran is complying with its end of the nuclear bargain, according to international observers and American intelligence officials. But the United States is now breaking the deal, poised to reimpose sanctions that were lifted on Iran for the promise of ceasing their nuclear weapons program. By breaking the deal, President Trump has breathed air into Tehran's inevitable argument to the international community: we kept our end of the deal, but America is not good for its word and cannot be trusted. It is in fact America who has violated its obligations under the deal. That is a deeply unfortunate and frankly dangerously embarrassing prospect, because Iran is one of the most nefarious actors on the world stage, playing a destabilizing role across the Middle East. I agree with President Trump's concerns about Iran's global posture and its non-nuclear actions, but we can keep the nuclear deal working while also going after Tehran for its support for terrorism, its human rights abuses against the Iranian people, its ballistic missile testing, and its violation of arms embargoes. These are not mutually exclusive actions. Frankly, President Trump has not used the full power of his office, or the additional tools Congress granted him, to strengthen our hand and lead the international community against Iran. What comes next? What do you think we can expect from our European allies and Iran? For now, the other parties to the JCPOA have indicated they intend to stay in the agreement. It's hard to predict what will happen next, but the decision by the president appears to reflect yet again that America first really means America alone. So as the international community stands at the precipice of this cliff now created by President Trump's decision to withdraw the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal, I am mindful of two immediate realities. First, when Israel looks north, she sees Iran staring back from its strengthened footholds in Syria and Lebanon. President Trump's decision to walk away from the deal will inevitably embolden Iran and endanger Israel. Look at the conflict that is occurring between Iran and Israel now via Syria. Second, next month President Trump will sit down with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un as part of the international effort to denuclearize the Korean peninsula and end the Korean conflict. Our friends and partners will understandably approach this important endeavor more cautiously now given Mr. Trump's decision to violate U.S. obligations under the Iran nuclear deal. They will likely wonder, will the U.S. keep its word this time? What role do you see Trump's recently revamped national security team playing in all this? The most articulate person, who is talking language similar to what I am talking, is Secretary James Mattis. There's not a lot of other voices in that room. Is there concern in the Senate that Mattis is now outnumbered by more hawkish individuals in the administration? Secretary Mattis is truly an incredible strength for our country. He is an extremely effective member of the Trump administration. He is a great advocate for our Department of Defense, and he is a team player with the State Department and the other agencies. He is known for his frankness and for his recognizing the chain of power and command. His views are more militaristic than I would perhaps agree on, but his views are very much bottom line. What's in the best interest of this country? You've got Secretary Mike Pompeo, who didn't want to go into this agreement. Worse that didn't want to negotiate. He was for a military solution. You've got John Bolton, who has been very much opposed to the Iran agreement. Their point of view is that by pulling out of the agreement, we get sanctions reimposed on Iran, and we don't pay much of a price, because what is Iran going to do? What's Europe going to do? They believe the United States is such a strong force globally that Europe's going to have to come along with the United States. They believe ultimately that threat, or implementation, will bring Iran back to the bargaining table in order to improve the agreement. That's what they believe. I disagree with that. I don't think Iran is that rational in its thoughts, and I think that the political pressure within the Iranian system, the more extreme elements, will control the debate. Now that Trump has pulled out of the deal, what do you think will happen next? The first thing I think the Iranians will do is take the United States into the enforcement mechanisms and perhaps even into the United Nations, and certainly in the global community, to take action against the United States for violating the JCPOA. I don't believe the Europeans will support the president in this decision. What comes next? Are these sanctions imposed against Europe companies, or just US companies? US businesses have always been reluctant to deal with Iran because of our banking system, so there's not been a lot of rushing in the United States to do business with Iran. It's been mostly Europe and Asia. So if that dynamic doesn't change, are you really putting more pressure on Iran? Does Europe stay in the agreement, or do they not? At least initially they will. Does Iran stay in the agreement, or do they pull out? We don't know. We don't know the pressures on Iran. I would expect at least in the short term they'll probably stay in the agreement, but I don't know it. I don't know that. So that's a risk factor. So you really are mixing this up. And to me, it's very dangerous and it's the wrong way to go. As a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, what do you make of the administration's negotiations with North Korea? I didn't agree with President Trump's mannerisms and threats originally. I still don't think that was the right way you handle diplomacy, but we need to advance diplomacy, and I applaud the administration in putting forward diplomacy. I think sending Director Pompeo before he was Secretary of State was appropriate to prepare for that meeting. And it looks like, listening to current conversations, that diplomacy is moving forward. There are some common objectives between North Korea, China, United States, South Korea, Japan, other allies. China and the United States both want North Korea not to be a nuclear power. There's not a lot of love lost between China and North Korea, so they don't want a nuclear power there. Both North Korea and China have a very common agenda in preserving a regime, so that's where you start from. Kim Jong-un wanted a nuclear weapon because he looks at it as his protection for his regime. You don't use military against a regime that has nuclear weapons. He has a nuclear weapon. He perfected a nuclear weapon. It's there. Can it reach the United States? No. Does he really want to reach the United States? He probably would like to have that threat, but it's not essential. It is very possible that he's made the calculation. He can protect his regime, at least in the short term, with the nuclear power he currently has, and doesn't need to advance it any further. He therefore may be willing for a freeze in his program, with assurances that the United States has truly changed its position on regime change. The United States never announced it was for regime change, but I think both China and North Korea believed that it was part of our policy. It's now been very much articulated by Mr. Pompeo that that's not our policy. So that, I think, is also part of advancing diplomacy. So we really may be lining up where diplomacy could work. You can't trust Kim Jong-un, and you know the impulsive nature of President Trump, so it is very fragile, but I think this is the best chance. Bolton recently said that Libya could provide a good model for Pyongyang. I think that's a bad example to use from Kim Jong-un's position, because of the end result for Muammar Gaddafi. Yeah, I could understand the United States saying, that's acceptable to us. But I think that's naive, because again, if I'm correct, and Kim Jong-un's desire to have a nuclear weapon is to preserve his regime, you don't look at Libya. What else do you hope to see accomplished around the question of denuclearization? We'd really like to be able to have a way of communicating and recognizing there's a lot more that needs to be done. I think China can play a very important role here. North Korea depends upon China on its economy. It's the most important country to them. So we need to have China with us on this strategy. From what I can tell, our conversations with China have been positive. However, put on top of that the recent trade problems with China. that could enter into it. China is very strategic. They look at what's in it for them. So this may broaden beyond just the immediate problems in North Korea. It may require further engagement. Ultimately, I think the conversations between the North and South are extremely encouraging. It's interesting, North and South agree on one thing: there should be one Korea. They disagree which Korea it should be, but they agree there should be one Korea. So that's a healthy sign. The more they get to know each other, the more pressure there will be on the North to empower their people, and that's good for stability in the region. We want to keep the discussions going. We want to provide a way in which the North Koreans can empower their own people, particularly on human rights. And we want to see a reduction of their nuclear program, and ultimately the elimination of their nuclear program. So that's the path we're on. My expectation is, let's eliminate the immediate crisis. Let's be committed to diplomacy, and let's get inspectors in, and know their program so that there's a better chance of figuring out a game plan where they can become denuclearized, with confidence in North Korea that their regime is safe. What do I want to see next? I just want to see grown-ups behave. In recent weeks, the president has taken various positions on trade that run counter to the traditional tenets of the GOP. How willing do you think your Republican colleagues will be to speak out on some of those issues? You have individual senators who are going to be very outspoken, but the Republican Party as such will only go so far against this president. They won't take him on. I can just imagine having a Democratic president do these trade policies, what we would have heard from the Republicans. I just can only imagine. Nothing would have been too severe for Congress to do to rein in this president and what he's done. There's no question in my mind that most of the Republicans strongly disagree with where he's heading on the trade issues. The president's handling of the steel and aluminum tariffs to me was the wrong way to go. He used a sledgehammer where he should have used a scalpel. There's a real fear that the normal way that you do trade negotiations is going to be ended, and that could end in a full-scale trade war. That's why I think the Republicans are genuinely very, very concerned, but they don't have an effective way of dealing with it. And there may not be an effective way. We could pass some laws, but the Republicans won't do that. They control the consideration of these bills, and the presidential powers here, absent Congress acting, are pretty broad. There's lots of chatter about a blue wave in 2018. How do you foresee that playing out? So far, the intensity level of the base that is likely to vote for Democrats has been much higher than the base that's likely to vote for Republicans. We saw the midterms 4 years ago. Turnout was disastrous for Democrats. So if we have a normal turnout year, it'll be much better in the midterms than it was 4 years ago. If we have the wave, it could be pretty dramatic. I think there's genuinely a belief that the Senate's now in play. A year ago, that was not the belief, so the Senate's in play, and certainly the House is in play. The election that really shocked me was Virginia. Nobody ever expected them to be able to equalize their General Assembly the way they did. I remember seeing the face of Mark Warner the next morning in shock. Really in shock. He had won his election by 1 point. I think that Virginia election was the most surprising. But there have been a couple others. You look at some of the Missouri races where it was just incredible. The Western Pennsylvania was pretty convincing. And of course Doug Jones's election in Alabama. It's Alabama. I understand the candidate he ran against. But Alabama. What's your sense of how Robert Mueller's investigation is progressing? The good news is that I don't know. Very, very few people know, and probably no one outside the inner circle of investigators know. There really have been virtually no leaks, because it's a professional team, and they recognize the importance of the work they're doing. But I don't know where that leads. I have no idea where that leads. In my view, President Trump has already interfered with the investigation. Whether that's legally accountable or not, I'll let other people determine. But he has interfered by the way that he has demeaned the investigation, the way he has demeaned the independence of the Department of Justice, like they're his people. No, they're America's people. The way that he's demeaned the independence of the judicial branch of government, and misled on what this investigation is all about. He's already, in my view, done things that are unacceptable for the President of the United States. We'll see where the Mueller investigation leads. We should have passed laws that right now would protect the integrity, well before now. I'm pleased that Senator Chuck Grassley has supported a bill that might get on the floor, but it should have been done a long time ago, and the Republicans won't do it. And Mitch McConnell says he's not even bringing this bill to the floor. It begs the question whether Congress, after the 2016 elections, didn't do what was right. We don't have a comprehensive, independent investigation. We don't have that, and we needed that in order to understand what Russia was doing. Yes, the Senate Intelligence Committee is doing a really good job on the intelligence side, but that's again limited, and it's in the political environment. We needed a 9/11-like commission. And we're paying a heavy price because we didn't get that.